Hey guys. So, Bridgerton season 3 is all out on Netflix. The second part came out on Thursday, June 13th. So, if you haven't watched it, you can watch it all now in full. Or if you have watched it, you probably have heard a lot of the comments in regards to season 3. That's how I'll phrase it, because I think some comments have been positive, but I have also heard a lot of negative comments. So essentially today what I wanted to talk about was kind of my thoughts on season 3, a little bit of what I've heard, and also how it compares to some of the books that I have read. Now, mind you, I have not read all of the Bridgerton books. I started reading Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is Colin and Penelope's book, to prepare for this season. And then I started reading Benedict's. I read Eloise's. I plan to read Francesca's to see how do some of these characters compare from the book to the show. And Francesca's is the one that I'm not quite sure yet, since I have not really gotten into, I would say, her character within the books. So this will contain spoilers for not only the books but also the show to kind of show that comparison. But let's get into it. How I'm going to do it is essentially by character. Most of the characters that I'm going to talk about are essentially Colin and Penelope, since it is their season, Eloise, Benedict, and then Francesca, because those are the characters that I have heard the most comments about and that I have the most comments about. So starting off with Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, Colin and Penelope. Now, in regards to their story, there have been a lot of comments in regards to, we didn't see enough Colin and Penelope, some scenes were cut out. Like, if you don't know that, some people are hoping that maybe, could deleted scenes be put on Netflix, so then you could see some of those scenes in regards to more of their relationship and how that works. But in regards to how it fits with the story, so if you don't know, within Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, Penelope has a younger sister, Felicity. She is out kind of on the market. And when Colin, says he wants to start, I wouldn't even say courting Penelope, but when he wants to be engaged to Penelope, he wants to go speak to Miss Featherington. Miss Featherington thinks that Colin is talking about Felicity, not talking about Felicity, and he has to say, no, I want to be engaged to Penelope. Penelope doesn't really have any other suitors within her book, so that element within the show is very different, and I think too it's supposed to display hey, this is her showing she has this newfound confidence. She is really showing herself. This is kind of what she wants. This is what she's wanting to go after. Here you go. This is the process. So that element I don't mind being changed. Definitely when it comes to how Colin figures out Penelope is Lady Whistledown, that's very different. How the engagement happens, a little different to some degree. So some of those elements are just misplaced a little bit. But in regards to Cressida taking credit for being Lady Whistledown, that happens. How essentially she kind of figures that out, that happens. The reward is more so, from what I remember, that was more so Lady Danbury putting that forward. The Queen really didn't, I would say, have much of a say or really do anything in regards to that. So that was different. But otherwise, so what I noticed was definitely in the first half of the season, we got more of that pining Colin Penelope relationship, ooh, will they, won't they? We know they will. When the second part came, I think that's where it, how are you going to fill in that time? Because as you know, those episodes are an hour long. How are you going to fill in all this time? I would say just focusing on Colin and Penelope. Now, mind you, would I have enjoyed more Colin and Penelope? Oh, yes. Because I need my little turtle dove to get her happy ending and to have everything that she needs. But you have these other elements where, Francesca's also in this season getting, not courted and then married. You have Eloise in that relationship, and that's very different within the book. The book, there's no like conflict between them. Essentially, everything is good. Eloise, by the end of the book, doesn't even know that Penelope is Lady Whistledown. Like, she doesn't find out until her book because she left the party when it came to them announcing, Penelope is her. So she doesn't even really know. The only one who does know at that time is just Colin. And, you also have Benedict. And Benedict's book, I think as we all know or have heard, like his book was before Colin and Penelope's. So, yes, some of these things are going to be very different, and that's understandable, and that's something that you have to figure out how to fill in time. So I get that, but at the same time, I also wish they would have shown, like, again, if there is an article or something out there, I'll see if I can find it. I'll put that in the description if I do, on what scenes were kind of cut out that we could have gotten, and that would have been fantastic. But I also understand where, hey, we have to focus on some of these other characters and some of these other conflicts because that's how it's written within the show. We have to fill time. Next character is Eloise. As I mentioned a little bit ago, Eloise doesn't even know about who Lady Whistledown is. And so by the time they announce it at the party, she's gone. Like, that's when her book essentially starts. And so she doesn't really find out until her book. And so here I think it was more so in regards to the show, like, hey, this is her arc. Like we saw at the end of season 2, she was and even at the beginning of season 3, very hurt by everything that has transpired in regards to Penelope and Lady Whistledown. But then by the second part, you kind of see this resolution and how their relationship kind of comes back together, which I thought was done very well. It was very touching, and honestly, it made me very happy because now that Penelope is part of the Bridgerton family, now it's like Eloise has another sister who was already her friend, like wasn't a part of the family before, but now she does. Like, her friend is a part of the family, and now it's just like, you can have the best of both worlds. But in regards to now, with her essentially going with Francesca to Scotland, a lot of theories kind of come about as to, what's next season? Who's that going to focus on? I really think that's going to focus on Benedict. I'll explain that once I talk about him and, some of the stuff in regards to the season for him. But I think with Eloise going to Scotland, that is just going to, I think, give her more character development. And then with her story, some things are probably going to change within there. And I think that's fine, because with reading her story, there are some things I even think with her character that we've seen within the show, things are going to be done, I think, very differently for her. And I think that's good. That's something that needs to occur, because it's not always going to be, hey, I made a book, like the book, now we're going to adapt it into a film or show. Some things are going to change, because I think given with time and maybe even how those things were written when the books were made, it's not going to, I don't want to phrase it as span well, but people will definitely have more criticisms than not. Like, there'll still be probably criticisms, but with, I think, how some of those dynamics are, it's just going to be very different than what we've seen in the show. And so then skirting back on that, it's just going to create more tension for, I think, the viewer in regards to, okay, do I want this dynamic or not? Like, it seems like the character is really changing. So then going on to Benedict. Now, why I think the next season is probably going to focus more so on Benedict is within his book, you can really tell. So, first off, you have at the end of the season, Eloise is leaving, Benedict's like, there's hints to a masquerade, masks, all that fun stuff. And that literally is how his book essentially begins. Sophie and Benedict's story. Benedict, when we first see him within that book, his mother is throwing a masquerade party, and it's for him to find somebody to marry. And even within there, when I read it, you can really tell, like, he's not taking it seriously. And I think how that connects a little bit in regards to this season, he talks a lot about, freedom and essentially I would almost want to say like finding himself. I think the thing that upset me the most, and as I think about it more, it connects with his story. But what upset me is he's at dinner with Tilly and Paul. Paul goes, what are your hobbies? And kind of lists some stuff out. Some of which kind of allude to like art, which is Benedict's passion, or what we've at least seen in the first 2 seasons. And when that question arose and how Benedict answered, so Benedict goes, well, I enjoy dancing. I dance at balls. I was really surprised that he didn't bring up the art. Now, why I think that kind of connects a little bit is, yes, he's trying to find himself. He's trying to find freedom. But I think at the same time, he has some insecurities. And so I think, from reading his book, Sophie finds his art and she's like, these are so good. I think it's going to lead into his story where, after meeting Sophie, having like almost an outside perspective, because as we see in like the first 2 seasons, it's just he's not really having luck, and it seemed like, hey, I paid for you to get into this school so then you would be accepted. And so I could see where, well, so is my art not good? Like, you have to pay people for me to even get into places that, and I can see where then you start questioning, okay, then I'm not gonna do it anymore. Like, I'm not even gonna touch it. And so I think once Sophie would see the art, she'll be like, oh my God, this is beautiful. And then he'll be like, okay, I'll draw again. I'll do art again. I think that's how it'll essentially kind of play into itself. In regards to how I would say his relationships are, so again, the situation with Tilly and Paul, that didn't really bother me. I know for some, I don't think it bothered them either. It is essentially that, like, hey, freedom, exploring, like, people are okay with that. It's then once you get to Francesca's story. So at the end of the season, when John says, oh yeah, my cousin will be coming with us, I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna meet Michael. I, again, have not read Francesca's story, but I know the central theme and like what matches are happening, what kind of goes on. Still plan to read it, just haven't yet. But I was really excited. I was, we're gonna see Michael. Then it's Michaela. My mood didn't really change. I was like, okay, we meet Michaela. There is so much conversation in regards to, with Francesca, how her story goes. And so let me kind of give that backstory. So the central conflict within Francesca's story is fertility. So she marries John. Her and John are trying to have a child. It's really not going well. John dies. She is grieving for multiple reasons. And it essentially, I would say takes time, but then that's where she meets Michael or gets to know Michael a little bit more, and that ends up being she marries him. They do end up having children. Mind you, I cannot recall if there is like a little bit of complication in the beginning or not, but I just know at the end they do end up having children. So a lot of the conversation has been, okay, with Francesca's story, it is very much about fertility. So how will that play out when it comes to, kind of changing Michael to Michaela? Now, I doubt, because then I started thinking recently, I doubt it's a situation where it's like there's another family member out there named Michael. There could be. I don't know. But you can definitely tell from the body language and when she meets Michaela that, oh, I'm interested in, like there seems to be some interest there. And so that's where then people, I think, are having the comments and the criticism where it's, okay, but Francesca's story does not align. It doesn't work. So here is kind of like my thoughts on it. I get to like, after reading some of the books and then also knowing the show, anytime you have a book to show movie adaptation, it's not always going to be the same. As long as you keep those like central, I would say, themes in, that's where people, I think, won't have as much criticism. So I understand where with Francesca's story, yeah, the main conflict is, one, she loses, yes, the love of her life, but two, it's also fertility. I feel what they might do is either in regards to the fertility, like, hey, they could potentially adopt a child. It could be where her and John do end up having a child. Or they just don't end up having children at all. I don't know. But there are probably going to be changes here. What they are, I cannot tell you because I cannot see into the future. But I think it's more so, I don't want to say give it a chance because I don't know. It's hard because I don't know how it will play out. But I also don't, it's odd because when the first half came out, a lot of people were like, I ship Cressida and Eloise. Even though we know Eloise has her own book, this is who she ends up with, but yet people were still shipping them. But then you have this situation and people are upset. Again, I understand why. Because if it is in connection with the book, I get that. Like, I understand that, especially with that being a main conflict. But also, you have Eloise and her story, and that's changing. So that's probably like the one part where I'm like, I don't get it. Like, we're okay here, but we're not okay here. Personally, when it comes to the season overall, there is something to me that just feels off. I saw something where like one of the showrunners, so season 1 and 2 had same showrunner, season 3 had a different one. So I don't know if that has something to do with it. I don't know if it is like we had so many stories, because even looking back on, let's say, Daphne's season, you had, mostly it focused on Daphne and Simon, but you also had where Colin was, engaged for a little bit. You had where Anthony was, sneaking around with the opera woman. So you had those stories, and then in season 2 you also had like the Jack conflict, in regards to the Featheringtons. Um, a little bit of those side stories. I don't know if maybe just because those side stories had like a little bit more screen time, or if it was because it really did feel like Colin, Penelope, and Francesca's story. you know, like I don't know. I really can't piece together what did feel different. I'm okay with how Penelope and Colin's story did play out. I knew some things were going to be different. That's just how, again, if you know, the book is not always going to be, it's not the show, movie, it's not always going to be the same as the book. So anticipated that. But it did feel odd. And I can't, again, I can't put my finger on why. What made it different in the background, instead of, again, I feel like it was just you have a lot of side stories getting more than just being a side story. I feel like that's probably it in my mind. That's what I'm going to go with. But I'm curious to see how next season will go. It will be 2 years from now. So we all waited for season 3, and now we get to wait for season 4. I'm really hoping it is Benedict's story, because I think it's time for that. And I can already feel in my bones that whomever they cast as Sophie, people will have a say. So, or even too, just how that story plays out. It happens. That's how it's always going to be. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. Feel free to leave your thoughts down below on what you think, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye.